On May 14, 1856, in Franklin County, Kentucky, a man named Elias Harper was sentenced to public execution for organizing a slave revolt. 3 days before the scheduled hanging, he made a claim that violated every known boundary of medicine, law, and religious doctrine. He stated that he was pregnant. The claim was medically impossible. The claim was legally absurd. Yet it triggered an immediate investigation that involved county physicians, church officials, and state medical examiners. Within 2 weeks, 3 men had lost their positions. One doctor's practice was quietly dissolved. Court records from the case were removed from public access and never restored. The execution was delayed indefinitely, then canceled without explanation. Elias Harper disappeared from all official documentation after June 1856. What compels a system built on absolute control to pause when faced with an impossibility it cannot immediately dismiss? Subscribe to the Bondage Chronicles. We document suppressed histories, erased lives, and the mechanisms of control that shaped them. Now, let's return to where it began. May 14, 1856. Franklin County Jail Yard. The deputy read names from a folded sheet. Each man stepped forward when called. When the name Elias Harper was spoken, he moved 1 pace ahead, stopped, and held out his hands. The iron cuffs were checked. The chain was pulled once. The deputy nodded and marked the list. The sheriff stood near the doorway with the county ledger open against his arm. He did not look up while the count was completed. When it ended, he closed the book and ordered the men back inside. Inside the holding room, Elias was told to kneel near the bench by the wall. A guard sat with his right leg extended, the trouser cut open at the calf. The skin was inflamed and dark. The injury had been recorded the previous night as farm implement wound. Elias was handed a small cloth bundle. He unfolded it and sorted the contents by touch. He crushed 1 leaf between his fingers, smelled it, and set it aside. He selected another, tore it into strips, and mixed it with lard from a tin. He worked without speaking. The guard washed his hands closely. Another guard stood behind Elias with a baton resting against his shoulder. No one commented. When the paste was ready, Elias applied it to the wound and wrapped the cloth tightly. He tied the knot twice. The guard flexed his foot once and did not object. Last time, the sheriff said from the doorway, "No more handling unless I say so." A clerk wrote a short note in the ledger. The sheriff pointed to the entry and said, "Mark it." The clerk hesitated, then added a line beneath Elias's name. As the men were moved back to their cells, the clerk paused, scratched something out, and shut the book. No one asked why. The jail sat between the courthouse and the livestock pens, close enough that sound carried from one to the other. Elias was placed in a cell with 2 others who did not speak to him. The door was locked. The deputy slid a tin cup of water through the opening and left. From the cell, Elias could hear the sheriff giving instructions to a deputy about posting notices. The words, "public execution," were spoken once, plainly, and not repeated. Later that morning, the notice was nailed to the courthouse board. The date was listed. The charge was listed. No names of witnesses were included. Elias had worked on 3 farms in the county over the previous 6 years. He was known for following orders quickly and for not requesting favors. When injured workers were brought to him in the fields, he treated them without comment and returned to his task. He was not known to speak during meals. The knowledge came from his mother, who had worked in the house of a plantation owner in Virginia before being sold south. She taught him to recognize plants by smell and texture before he could read. She showed him how to prepare poultices for infections, teas for fevers, and mixtures that induced vomiting when someone had eaten spoiled food. She was careful about what she taught and when. She never wrote anything down. When Elias was 12, his mother was sold to a buyer from Louisiana. He did not see her again. The new owner assigned him to field work and told him to forget what he knew. Elias continued treating injuries quietly, never offering unless asked, never explaining how he knew what to do. The rumor began the week before his arrest. It came through a man who worked at the mill and passed information between farms. He told an overseer that meetings were happening after dark in the tobacco barn. He named Elias as the one who spoke during them. 2 other enslaved men were arrested the same night. They were beaten during questioning and released back to their owners the next morning. Elias was not released. The sheriff questioned him for 3 hours. Elias answered only when addressed. He denied organizing anything. He denied making plans. The sheriff wrote nothing during the questioning. When the county doctor arrived, he examined Elias for injuries and noted none. He signed a form stating the prisoner was fit to stand trial. No trial date was announced. The sentence was read the next day. The charge was inciting insurrection. The penalty was death by hanging. The date was set for May 31st, 1856. After the notice was posted, the jail routine changed. Deputies checked the cells more often. Food was brought at irregular times. The minister arrived in the afternoon. The minister was a thin man with a black coat and a small notebook. He stood outside Elias's cell and asked if he wished to confess. Elias said no. The minister asked if he wished to pray. Elias said no. The minister wrote something in his notebook and left. That night, Elias was woken twice for head count. The second time, a deputy asked him to stand closer to the door. He complied. The deputy examined his face and hands, then locked the door again. The next morning, Elias was brought into the yard. He was ordered to assist with cleaning tools. He was given a bucket and told to scrub dried blood from a wagon rail. He worked steadily. When finished, he was told to wait. A farm owner arrived with a complaint about the injury to his hired guard. He demanded to know who treated it. The sheriff said it was done under supervision and closed the discussion. The owner asked if Elias was a doctor. The sheriff said no. The owner asked if Elias should be allowed to practice medicine. The sheriff did not answer. The owner left. Later that day, Elias was questioned again, this time by a deputy unfamiliar to him. The questions were the same. The answers were the same. The deputy asked if Elias had read books about medicine. Elias said he could not read. The deputy asked where he learned to treat wounds. Elias said his mother taught him. The deputy asked if his mother was a doctor. Elias said no. The deputy recorded nothing. That evening, one of the men in the neighboring cell spoke to Elias through the wall. He said, "They know more than they say." Elias did not respond. The man spoke again. "They'll hang you regardless." Elias remained silent. On the third day, the county doctor returned. He said the guard's leg was improving. He asked Elias what plants he used. Elias said nothing. The doctor asked again. The sheriff told Elias he was not required to answer. The doctor left without recording anything. After that visit, Elias was denied access to the yard. Meals were brought to his cell. The chain was not removed at night. On the fourth day, Elias did not eat his morning ration. He poured the water from his cup onto the floor and used a piece of cloth to soak it up. He pressed the damp cloth against his abdomen and lay back. No one observed this directly. By the next morning, he appeared unsteady when ordered to stand. A deputy noted it and told the sheriff. The sheriff said nothing. The minister returned that afternoon. He stood farther back from the cell this time. He asked if Elias was ill. Elias said yes. The minister asked if he needed prayer. Elias did not answer. The minister left and spoke with the sheriff in the corridor. Their voices were low. No one was called. That night, Elias vomited into the corner of the cell. The smell remained in the morning. The next inspection included the county doctor. He observed Elias standing with one hand against the wall. He asked Elias where the pain was. Elias placed his hand over his abdomen. The doctor pressed lightly and stepped back. The sheriff asked if the prisoner was faking. The doctor said he could not determine that yet. A note was made in the ledger. That afternoon, Elias was allowed water more frequently. Food remained restricted. He did not request more. Word spread quickly among the jail staff. One deputy said Elias was trying to die early. Another said he was poisoning himself. A third said it did not matter because the date was fixed. The minister returned the next day with a Bible and asked to speak privately. The sheriff allowed it, but remained within hearing distance. The minister asked Elias if he believed God could intervene. Elias said nothing. The minister asked if Elias believed his body could be changed by God's will. Elias said, "I am sick." The minister wrote in his notebook again. On the 6th day, Elias's abdomen was visibly swollen. A guard commented on it in the yard. Another told him to be quiet. The county doctor was summoned again. He examined Elias for longer this time. He asked if Elias had eaten anything unusual. Elias did not answer. The doctor asked if anyone had given him herbs. The sheriff said no one was permitted to. The doctor pressed on the swelling and measured it with his hands. He asked Elias to stand and turn. Elias complied slowly. The doctor said he needed more time. The sheriff ordered Elias returned to his cell and posted a deputy outside it. That night, the clerk opened the ledger and reviewed the earlier entry. He compared it to an older volume kept in the cabinet. He did not call anyone. The following morning, the sheriff announced that Elias would be examined again in 2 days. The execution notice remained posted. No explanation was given. In the yard, an enslaved man cleaning the steps glanced at Elias and then looked away. Another crossed himself. No one spoke. By the end of the week, the swelling had increased. Elias moved slowly. His breathing was shallow but controlled. He accepted water and refused food. The minister arrived with the county doctor together. They spoke briefly to the sheriff before entering the cell area. The doctor asked Elias if he was in pain. Elias nodded once. The minister asked if Elias believed this condition had meaning. Elias did not answer. The doctor said the symptoms did not match poisoning. He said they did not match infection either. He said he would need assistance. The sheriff asked if the execution should proceed. The doctor said he could not certify that yet. The sheriff closed the ledger and said he would wait. That evening, a new note was added beneath Elias's name. It referenced a pending condition. No description followed. The other prisoners were moved to different cells. Elias remained where he was. The notice on the courthouse board was not removed. On May 24, 1856, 7 days before the scheduled execution, Elias was moved to a separate holding area. The room had a cot, a bucket, and a small barred window. A deputy was stationed outside at all times. The county doctor visited twice that day. During the second visit, he brought a medical textbook and compared Elias's symptoms to several entries. He did not share his conclusions. The minister visited in the evening. He asked Elias if he understood the gravity of his situation. Elias said yes. The minister asked if he was prepared to die. Elias said, "I am not dying yet." The minister paused. He asked what Elias meant. Elias placed his hand on his abdomen and said, "I am with child." The minister stepped back. He did not speak. He left the room immediately and went directly to the sheriff's office. By morning, the statement had been recorded in 3 separate documents. The claim was written in the jail log at 6:14 a.m. on May 25, 1856. The clerk who recorded it used the exact words Elias had spoken. He did not add commentary. The sheriff read the entry twice and ordered the clerk to copy it into the county medical record. The county doctor was summoned before noon. He arrived with a leather bag and a second physician, a man named Dr. Whitmore who had studied in Philadelphia. They examined Elias for 40 minutes. Neither spoke during the examination. When they finished, Dr. Whitmore asked Elias to repeat his claim. Elias said, "I am carrying a child." Dr. Whitmore asked how long Elias believed he had been in this condition. Elias said, 3 months. The doctor asked if Elias understood that men could not bear children. Elias said, "I know what I am told. I know what I feel." Dr. Whitmore looked at the county doctor. The county doctor shook his head. They left without issuing a statement. That afternoon, The minister returned with 2 church elders. They stood outside the holding room and prayed aloud for 15 minutes. When they finished, one elder asked the sheriff if the execution would proceed. The sheriff said he was awaiting medical certification. The elder asked if the claim was being investigated seriously. The sheriff said it was. The elder asked why. The sheriff did not answer. By evening, word had spread to the courthouse. A clerk mentioned it to a lawyer. The lawyer mentioned it to a magistrate. The magistrate asked the sheriff for clarification. The sheriff provided none. On May 26th, a 3rd doctor arrived from Lexington. His name was Dr. Samuel Pritchard. He had published papers on abdominal disorders and had served as a medical examiner in 3 counties. He was accompanied by a clerk who took notes. Dr. Pritchard examined Elias for over an hour. He measured the swelling with calipers. He pressed on different areas and recorded Elias's reactions. He asked detailed questions about diet, water intake, bowel movements, and pain. Elias answered each question calmly. Dr. Pritchard asked if Elias had ingested anything to create the swelling. Elias said no. The doctor asked if anyone had given him substances. Elias said no. The doctor asked if Elias had medical training. Elias said his mother taught him about plants. Dr. Pritchard paused. He asked what plants Elias knew. Elias listed 12 by name, describing their uses and preparation methods. The doctor recorded every word. When the examination ended, Dr. Pritchard spoke privately with the sheriff. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. No record was made. That evening, the execution notice was removed from the courthouse board. No announcement was posted in its place. On May 27th, the jail received a delivery of medical supplies. The shipment included laudanum, castor oil, and several surgical instruments. The supplies were logged and stored in the sheriff's office. No illness had been reported among the prisoners. No medical procedures had been requested. The deputy who signed for the delivery asked the sheriff if a doctor had ordered them. The sheriff said yes, but did not specify which doctor. Later that day, a second notice appeared on the courthouse board. It announced a delay in the scheduled execution of Elias Harper due to medical evaluation. It did not provide a new date. The notice was signed by the county magistrate, not the sheriff. That afternoon, Dr. Pritchard returned with 2 assistants. They set up a portable examination table in the holding room. Elias was instructed to lie down. The examination lasted 90 minutes. The assistants measured, palpated, and documented every visible change in Elias's body. Dr. Pritchard dictated observations continuously. The clerk recorded them without pause. When the examination concluded, Dr. Pritchard ordered Elias to remain on the table. He left the room and did not return for 30 minutes. During that time, Elias was not permitted to move. The assistants remained in the room but did not speak. When Dr. Pritchard returned, he carried a sealed envelope. He handed it to the sheriff and said, "Read this privately." The sheriff opened the envelope in his office. He read the contents twice. He placed the letter in the county safe and locked it. He did not share its contents with anyone. That evening, the minister requested access to Elias. The sheriff denied the request. The minister asked why. The sheriff said the prisoner was under medical observation. The minister asked if he could observe. The sheriff said no. The minister left and wrote a letter to the Bishop of Lexington. He described the situation and requested guidance. The letter was sent the following morning. On May 28th, the jail was visited by a state medical examiner. He arrived without announcement and demanded immediate access to the prisoner. The sheriff complied. The examiner spent 2 hours with Elias. He performed tests that had not been conducted by the previous doctors. He asked Elias to walk, to bend, to hold specific positions. He examined Elias's hands, feet, and neck. He asked Elias if he had ever been pregnant before. Elias said no. The examiner asked if Elias believed this was a punishment from God. Elias said, "I believe this is what is happening." The examiner asked if Elias expected to give birth. Elias said, "I expect to survive." The examiner left without speaking to the sheriff. That night, a deputy overheard two doctors arguing in the courthouse hallway. One said the condition was fabricated. The other said the symptoms were consistent with something, but he could not identify what. The argument ended abruptly when the sheriff appeared. On May 29th, Elias was examined by all three doctors simultaneously. They worked in shifts, each conducting independent assessments. They compared notes afterward in the sheriff's office. The discussion lasted 4 hours. No consensus was reached. Dr. Whitmore said the swelling could be caused by deliberate ingestion of specific plants. He listed several that could produce similar effects. He said none of those plants were available in the jail. Dr. Pritchard said the swelling was real, but the cause remained unclear. He said he could not rule out deliberate manipulation, but he also could not prove it. The state examiner said the claim itself was medically impossible, but the refusal to dismiss it outright created a legal problem. He said if the execution proceeded and the condition worsened afterward, the state could face scrutiny. The sheriff asked what they recommended. Dr. Pritchard said the execution should be delayed indefinitely pending further observation. Dr. Whitmore agreed. The state examiner said he would submit a formal report to the governor's office. The sheriff asked how long the delay should last. Dr. Pritchard said, "Until the truth is established." The sheriff asked what truth they were looking for. No one answered. That evening, the minister's letter reached the Bishop of Lexington. The bishop read it and immediately dispatched a senior clergyman to Franklin County. The clergyman arrived the following morning. On May 30th, one day before the original execution date, the clergyman met with the sheriff, the three doctors, and the county magistrate. The meeting was closed. No record was kept. The discussion focused on a single question. Could God create a medical impossibility to demonstrate divine will? Dr. Pritchard said he did not believe that was the case here. The clergyman asked if he could prove it was not. Dr. Pritchard said no. The clergyman asked if the absence of proof meant the claim should be taken seriously. Dr. Pritchard said the claim was being investigated medically, not theologically. The clergyman said the two could not be separated in a case involving an impossibility. The magistrate asked if the execution could proceed without certainty. The clergyman said it could not, morally. Dr. Pritchard said it could not, legally. The sheriff said nothing. The meeting ended without a decision. That afternoon, Elias was moved to a larger room with better ventilation. He was given a second blanket and allowed to keep a candle lit at night. Food was brought 3 times a day. No explanation was given for the improved conditions. The minister was granted access that evening. He asked Elias if he understood what he had set in motion. Elias said yes. The minister asked if Elias feared God's judgment. Elias said, "I fear men more." The minister asked if Elias was lying. Elias said, "I am saying what is true for me." The minister did not pray. He left and reported the conversation to the clergyman. The clergyman wrote a second letter to the bishop. He said the situation was escalating beyond medical or legal jurisdiction. He said the church would need to take a public position. The bishop did not respond immediately. On May 31st, the day Elias was scheduled to die, he was alive, conscious, and under continuous observation. The gallows remained assembled in the courthouse yard. No one was hanged that day. By June 1st, the case had spread beyond Franklin County. A correspondent for the Lexington Observer wrote a brief notice about the delayed execution. The notice did not explain why. It mentioned only that a medical investigation was ongoing. 3 newspapers in Louisville reprinted the notice. One added a single sentence: "The condemned man has made a claim that defies natural law." By June 3rd, letters were arriving at the courthouse. Most demanded clarification. Some demanded the execution proceed immediately. A few asked if the church had declared a miracle. The sheriff did not respond to any of them. Dr. Pritchard continued his examinations daily. On June 4th, he measured Elias's abdomen again. The swelling had not decreased. It had not increased significantly either. Dr. Pritchard recorded this as stable distension of unknown origin. He asked Elias if he felt movement inside. Elias said yes. The doctor asked Elias to describe it. Elias said it felt like pressure shifting from one side to the other. Dr. Pritchard pressed his hand against the area Elias indicated. He felt nothing. He recorded, patient reports sensation inconsistent with observed stasis. On June 5th, the Bishop of Lexington issued a statement. It was read aloud in churches across 3 counties. The statement said the church recognized that God's will could manifest in ways that defy human understanding. It said the church could not declare a miracle without evidence, but it also could not declare the absence of one. It concluded by saying the case should be resolved through prayer, patience, and careful observation. The statement did not mention Elias by name. The minister in Franklin County read the statement to Elias. Elias listened without expression. The minister asked if Elias believed God was protecting him. Elias said, "I believe I am still alive." The minister asked if Elias would repent. Elias said, "For what?" The minister did not answer. On June 6th, the state medical examiner returned. He brought a colleague from the Medical College of Ohio. The colleague specialized in abdominal pathology. They examined Elias together for 3 hours. They used instruments Elias had not seen before. They took measurements and compared them to charts they had brought. When they finished, the colleague asked Elias if he had access to specific plants. He named 4. Elias recognized 3 of them. The colleague asked if Elias had consumed any of them recently. Elias said no. The colleague asked if anyone else could have given them to him. Elias said no. The colleague turned to the state examiner and said, "This is not accidental." The state examiner asked what he meant. The colleague said, "If this is fabricated, it is extraordinarily sophisticated." He did not say whether he believed it was fabricated. That evening, the sheriff received a letter from the governor's office. The letter requested a full written account of the case, including all medical findings and the rationale for the delayed execution. The sheriff worked through the night preparing the report. He included copies of the doctor's notes, the jail logs, and the bishop's statement. He sent the report the next morning. On June 8th, 2 more doctors arrived from Louisville. They were not invited by the sheriff. They came at the request of a medical society that had heard about the case. The sheriff allowed them access. They examined Elias and left without commenting. One of them wrote a letter to a colleague describing the case as either the most elaborate fraud I have encountered or something I cannot explain. The letter was published in a medical journal 3 months later. By June 10th, the jail was receiving visitors daily. Most were doctors. Some were clergy. A few were lawyers. Elias was examined so frequently that Dr. Pritchard requested a restriction. The sheriff agreed and limited examinations to once per day. On June 11th, Elias refused to be examined. He said he was tired. Dr. Pritchard asked if Elias was in pain. Elias said no. The doctor asked if the condition had changed. Elias said no. The doctor asked why Elias was refusing. Elias said, "Because I can." The sheriff was notified. He ordered Elias to comply. Elias complied. That evening, Elias asked the deputy for paper and ink. The deputy asked why. Elias said he wanted to write a letter. The deputy asked to whom. Elias said, "Anyone who will listen." The deputy denied the request. On June 12th, a journalist from the Frankfort Commonwealth arrived at the jail. He requested an interview with Elias. The sheriff denied it. The journalist asked if he could observe an examination. The sheriff denied that as well. The journalist asked if the execution had been canceled. The sheriff said it had been delayed. The journalist asked why. The sheriff said, "Medical uncertainty." The journalist published an article the next day. It described Elias's claim and noted that multiple doctors had been unable to disprove it. It did not speculate on whether the claim was true. On June 14th, the governor's office sent a second letter. It requested that a final determination be made within 2 weeks. It said the state could not justify an indefinite delay without clear medical grounds. The sheriff called a meeting with all 3 primary doctors. He told them they had until June 28th to reach a conclusion. Dr. Pritchard said 2 weeks was insufficient for a proper evaluation. The sheriff said it was all the time they had. Dr. Whitmore asked what would happen if they could not reach a conclusion. The sheriff said the execution would proceed. On June 15th, Elias was informed of the deadline. He did not react visibly. The minister visited and asked Elias if he was afraid. Elias said, "I have been afraid since the day I was born." The minister asked if Elias believed he would survive. Elias said, "I believe I will try." On June 16th, Dr. Pritchard proposed a surgical examination. He said it was the only way to determine the true cause of the swelling. Dr. Whitmore objected. He said surgery carried significant risk and could kill Elias regardless of the outcome. Dr. Pritchard said the alternative was execution. Dr. Whitmore said that was not a medical decision. The state examiner said it was unavoidable. The sheriff asked Elias if he would consent to surgery. Elias asked what would happen if he refused. The sheriff said the execution would proceed on schedule. Elias asked what would happen if he survived the surgery. The sheriff said that would depend on what was found. Elias consented. The surgery was scheduled for June 20th. On June 17th, the minister held a special service. He prayed for Elias's soul and for the wisdom of those conducting the examination. He did not predict an outcome. On June 18th, Elias was moved to a room that had been cleared and sterilized. Medical equipment was brought in. 2 nurses were assigned to monitor him overnight. Elias did not sleep. On June 19th, Dr. Pritchard reviewed the surgical plan with the sheriff. He said the procedure would reveal whether the swelling was caused by external substances, internal manipulation, or something else. The sheriff asked what something else meant. Dr. Pritchard said he did not know. That evening, Elias was visited by the minister one last time. The minister asked if Elias wanted to confess. Elias said, "I have nothing to confess that you would believe." The minister asked if Elias was ready to meet God. Elias said, "I have been ready my entire life." The minister prayed over him and left. On the morning of June 20th, 1856, Elias was prepared for surgery. He was given laudanum to calm him, but not enough to render him unconscious. Dr. Pritchard, Dr. Whitmore, and the state examiner were present. A clerk was present to document findings. The sheriff observed from the doorway. Elias was placed on the table. His wrists and ankles were restrained. Dr. Pritchard positioned his instruments and prepared to make the first incision. Elias looked at the ceiling and did not speak. The room was silent. Dr. Pritchard raised the scalpel. Dr. Pritchard made the first incision at 9:47 a.m. The cut was shallow, designed to expose the outer layer of tissue without penetrating the abdominal cavity. Blood welled immediately. The clerk recorded the time and the location of the incision. Elias did not flinch. Dr. Pritchard worked slowly, separating tissue with precision. He called out observations as he worked. The clerk wrote each one. Subcutaneous layer shows no sign of foreign material. Tissue consistency normal. No visible puncture wounds. Dr. Whitmore stood to the side, holding a basin. The state examiner watched without speaking. At 10:02 a.m., Dr. Pritchard reached the fascia. He paused and looked at Dr. Whitmore. Dr. Whitmore nodded. Dr. Pritchard made a second incision, deeper this time. He spread the opening and examined the cavity. He stopped. The clerk asked if he should record something. Dr. Pritchard did not respond. Dr. Whitmore stepped closer. He looked into the opening. He stepped back. The state examiner asked what they were seeing. Dr. Pritchard said, "There is fluid." The examiner asked what kind. Dr. Pritchard said, "I need to extract it." He inserted a thin tube and drew out a small amount of liquid. He held it up to the light. It was clear with a faint yellow tint. Dr. Whitmore asked if it was ascites. Dr. Pritchard said, "It could be." The examiner asked what else it could be. Dr. Pritchard did not answer. He continued the examination, probing deeper. He located the source of the swelling. It was a sac, roughly the size of a closed fist, positioned behind the stomach. He asked for a scalpel with a finer edge. Dr. Whitmore handed it to him. Dr. Pritchard made a careful incision in the sac. More fluid drained out. He examined the interior of the sac with his fingers. He withdrew his hand and stepped back. Dr. Whitmore asked what he found. Dr. Pritchard said, "Tissue." The examiner asked what kind of tissue. Dr. Pritchard said, "I cannot identify it." He extracted a small sample and placed it on a tray. All three doctors examined it. Dr. Whitmore said it looked organic. The examiner said it did not look like any organ he recognized. Dr. Pritchard said, "It is not a pregnancy." The examiner asked what it was. Dr. Pritchard said, "I do not know." At 10:34 a.m., Dr. Pritchard closed the incision. He sutured the layers methodically. Elias remained conscious throughout. When the final stitch was placed, Dr. Pritchard stepped back and removed his gloves. The sheriff asked for a conclusion. Dr. Pritchard said, "The swelling was real. The cause remains unclear." The sheriff asked if Elias had fabricated it. Dr. Pritchard said, "Not in the way you mean." The sheriff asked what that meant. Dr. Pritchard said, "If he created this condition, he did so using methods I do not understand." The examiner said, "That is not an answer." Dr. Pritchard said, "It is the only answer I have." Elias was moved to a recovery room. He was monitored continuously. The swelling began to decrease within hours. By evening, the fluid had been mostly reabsorbed. The tissue sample was preserved in alcohol and labeled for further study. On June 21st, Elias was able to sit up. He refused food but accepted water. The minister visited and asked how he felt. Elias said, "Lighter." The minister asked if Elias understood what had been found. Elias said, "They found what I knew they would find." The minister asked what that meant. Elias said, "Enough to keep me alive." The minister left without praying. On June 22nd, the doctors submitted their joint report to the sheriff. The report stated that Elias had exhibited symptoms consistent with abdominal distension caused by fluid accumulation and an unidentified tissue mass. It stated that the condition was not a pregnancy. It stated that the origin of the tissue could not be determined without further analysis. It did not recommend resuming the execution. The sheriff forwarded the report to the governor's office. On June 23rd, the governor's office sent a response. It requested clarification on whether the condition had been deliberately induced. The doctors met again. Dr. Whitmore said it was theoretically possible that Elias had ingested substances that caused fluid retention and tissue growth, but he could not identify which substances or how they were obtained. Dr. Pritchard said even if that were true, the level of knowledge required would exceed anything he had seen from untrained individuals. The state examiner said the question of intent could not be medically proven. They submitted a revised report stating, the condition was real. The method of creation, if deliberate, remains unknown. The governor's office accepted the report and issued an order on June 25th. The execution was suspended indefinitely pending further investigation. No new investigation was opened. On June 26th, Elias was returned to a standard cell. He was no longer restrained. The swelling was almost entirely gone. He moved without difficulty. The minister visited and asked Elias what he had done. Elias said, "I survived." The minister said, "You manipulated everyone." Elias said, "I told them what I needed them to hear." The minister asked if Elias felt remorse. Elias said, "For what?" "For not dying when they wanted me to." The minister had no response. On June 27th, a deputy reported that Elias had requested access to the yard. The request was denied. On June 28th, the deadline passed. No final determination was issued. That evening, the sheriff met privately with Dr. Pritchard. The conversation was not recorded, but a deputy later reported hearing the sheriff say, "This cannot remain unresolved." Dr. Pritchard replied, "Then resolve it legally, not medically." On June 30th, the magistrate reviewed all documentation related to the case. He noted that the original charge of inciting insurrection remained valid. He noted that the medical delay had been procedural, not a dismissal. He asked the sheriff if the execution could now proceed. The sheriff said the governor's order still stood. The magistrate asked if the order could be rescinded. The sheriff said that would require the governor to declare the medical question resolved. The magistrate asked if it was resolved. The sheriff said no. On July 2nd, a journalist from Cincinnati published an article titled "The Impossible Claim." It described the case in detail and included quotes from unnamed medical sources. It concluded by asking whether the delay was justified or whether the state had been deceived. The article was reprinted in 9 newspapers. On July 5th, the governor's office sent a third letter. It stated that the case had become a public spectacle and needed immediate resolution. It ordered the sheriff to either proceed with the execution or release Elias back to his owner. The sheriff read the letter twice. He called the magistrate and the 3 doctors to a meeting. He asked if anyone could definitively state that Elias had committed fraud. No one could. He asked if anyone could definitively state that the pregnancy claim was impossible. Dr. Pritchard said it was medically impossible. The sheriff asked if that was the same as provably false. Dr. Pritchard said no. The sheriff asked what the difference was. Dr. Pritchard said, "One is a statement of natural law. The other is a statement of fact. I can assert the first. I cannot prove the second in this case." The magistrate said the execution could not proceed without certainty. The sheriff said release was not an option either. The meeting ended without resolution. On July 8th, Elias was examined one final time. Dr. Pritchard found no remaining swelling. He found no residual fluid. The surgical incision was healing normally. He asked Elias how he felt. Elias said, "Ready." The doctor asked for what. Elias said, "Whatever comes next." On July 10th, the sheriff was called to an urgent meeting at the courthouse. He was told that a decision had been made at the state level. He was not told what the decision was. On July 12, 1856, at 4:15 a.m., 2 deputies entered Elias's cell. They told him to stand. They did not restrain him. They walked him through the jail corridor to a side exit. A wagon was waiting. The sheriff was not present. Elias was placed in the wagon. The deputies sat on either side of him. The wagon moved. Elias asked where they were going. Neither deputy answered. The wagon traveled east for 40 minutes. It stopped at a crossroads 5 miles outside Franklin County. The deputies told Elias to step down. He did. One deputy handed him a cloth bundle. Inside was a canteen, a piece of bread, and a folded paper. The paper was a release order and signed. The deputy said, "You are no longer in custody." Elias asked why. The deputy said, "We were told to bring you here and leave you." Elias asked who gave the order. The deputy said, "Does it matter?" The wagon turned and drove back toward town. Elias stood at the crossroads alone. The sun had not yet risen. He opened the canteen and drank. He ate the bread slowly. When he finished, he walked north. By July 15th, rumors about Elias's release had spread through Franklin County. No official announcement was made. The execution notice remained on file in the courthouse, but was never publicly addressed. The sheriff told a deputy that Elias had been transferred to another jurisdiction. The deputy asked which one. The sheriff said he was not authorized to say. The minister asked the sheriff if Elias had been freed. The sheriff said the matter was closed. The minister asked what that meant. The sheriff did not answer. On July 18th, Dr. Pritchard submitted a final report to the state medical board. He described the case, the examinations, the surgery, and the findings. He concluded by stating that he could not identify the mechanism by which the condition had been created. He added a note. If this was deliberate manipulation, it required knowledge and skill far beyond what any enslaved person should possess. If it was not deliberate, I cannot explain it. The report was filed and never published. Dr. Whitmore wrote a private letter to a colleague in Philadelphia. He described the case as the most confounding I have encountered. He said he believed Elias had ingested specific herbs to create the symptoms, but could not prove it. He concluded, whether he deceived us or revealed something we do not understand, I cannot say. The letter was kept in a private collection and discovered in 1923. The state medical examiner returned to his post and did not speak publicly about the case. When asked about it years later, he said only, "Some questions are better left unanswered." On July 22nd, the jail log was reviewed by a county clerk. He noted that Elias Harper's entry ended abruptly on July 12th with the notation, "Released per order." No signature appeared. No order number was listed. The clerk asked the sheriff for clarification. The sheriff said the order came from the governor's office. The clerk checked the correspondence file. No such order was found. He did not pursue the matter further. On July 30th, the tissue sample that had been extracted during surgery was examined by a professor of anatomy in Louisville. He identified it as fibrous connective tissue with irregular cellular structure. He could not determine its origin. He noted that similar tissue formations had been observed in cases of prolonged inflammation, but the pattern in this sample was unusual. He recommended further study. No further study was conducted. By August 1856, most of the doctors involved had returned to their regular practices. None spoke publicly about the case. Dr. Pritchard was asked by a medical society to present his findings. He declined. Dr. Whitmore mentioned the case once in a lecture, but did not name Elias or the location. The state examiner never referenced it again. The minister wrote a letter to the bishop describing the case as a test of faith that I failed. The bishop did not respond. In September 1856, a brief notice appeared in the Lexington Observer. It stated that the execution of an unnamed prisoner in Franklin County had been postponed due to medical complications. It said the case had been resolved administratively. No details were provided. By October, the case was rarely discussed. A few lawyers referenced it in private conversations as an example of procedural ambiguity. A few doctors mentioned it as a cautionary tale about accepting patient claims at face value. No one called it a miracle. No one called it fraud. In November 1856, a journalist attempted to locate Elias Harper. He checked jail records, property records, and census data. He found no trace of him after July 12th. He published a short article titled, "The Vanished Man." It raised questions but provided no answers. The article was not widely read. Over the following months, the story circulated quietly. Some said Elias had been secretly executed. Some said he had escaped to Canada. Some said he had died from complications of the surgery. None of these claims were verified. In 1857, a preacher in Louisville used the case as the subject of a sermon. He argued that Elias had been an instrument of divine intervention, saved by God to reveal the limits of human judgment. Another preacher in Frankfort argued the opposite. He said Elias had been a deceiver who manipulated faith for selfish purposes. Neither preacher had met Elias. In 1858, a medical journal published an anonymous account of the case. It described the symptoms, the examinations, and the surgical findings. It concluded with a question: was this a case of sophisticated deception or evidence of medical phenomena we do not yet understand? The article was read by a small number of physicians and then forgotten. In 1860, the jail in Franklin County was expanded. Old records were moved to a storage facility. Among them was the ledger containing Elias Harper's name. The entry was brief. It listed his arrest date, his charge, and the notation, "Released per order." No execution date appeared. In 1863, during the Civil War, the storage facility was damaged by fire. Many records were lost. The ledger containing Elias's entry survived, but was water-damaged. Parts of it became illegible. By 1865, the case was no longer remembered by most people in Franklin County. A few older residents recalled hearing about the man who claimed to be pregnant, but details were vague. No one could remember his name. In 1871, a former deputy from the Franklin County Jail was interviewed for a local history project. He mentioned the case briefly. He said the prisoner had been released quietly to avoid scandal. He said he did not know what happened to him after that. In 1889, a historian researching slavery in Kentucky found a reference to the case in a church archive. The reference was a single sentence in a minister's diary. "The Harper case remains unresolved in my conscience." No further context was provided. In 1902, a doctor writing a book on medical anomalies included a chapter on impossible pregnancies. He mentioned the Franklin County case as an example of either mass delusion or deliberate fraud. He did not name Elias. In 1918, a descendant of Dr. Pritchard found his grandfather's notes in an old trunk. Among them was a page titled "The Harper Examination." It included sketches of the abdominal cavity and a handwritten note. "I do not believe he lied. I believe he created a truth I could not disprove." The notes were donated to a medical library and cataloged, but never studied. In 1934, a journalist writing about unusual legal cases discovered the execution notice for Elias Harper in the Franklin County archives. The notice listed the charge and the original date. It did not list a cancellation. The journalist checked death records. No death certificate for Elias Harper existed. He checked property records. No sale or transfer of an enslaved person named Elias Harper was recorded after July 1856. He published an article asking what had happened. No one responded. In 1956, exactly 100 years after the case, a local historian attempted to compile a definitive account. He reviewed every available document. He interviewed descendants of people involved. He found contradictions in every account. Some said Elias had been executed secretly. Some said he had escaped. Some said he had been sold south and died anonymously. None could be confirmed. The historian concluded his report with a single sentence: Elias Harper disappeared from all records, and his fate remains unknown. In 1972, a graduate student researching resistance strategies among enslaved people came across the case. She noted it as an example of medical manipulation as a survival tool. She wrote, "Whether Elias Harper actually believed his claim or constructed it deliberately, he succeeded in creating enough uncertainty to disrupt a system that allowed no uncertainty." Her thesis was filed in a university library and rarely cited. In 2003, a genealogist searching for descendants of enslaved families in Kentucky found a reference to an Elias Harper in a census record from Ohio in 1870. The record listed him as a freedman, age approximately 40, occupation listed as herbalist. No other records connected this person to the Franklin County case. The connection could not be verified. In 2019, a construction crew renovating the old Franklin County courthouse discovered a sealed box behind a wall. Inside were documents from the 1850s, including correspondence between the sheriff and the governor's office. One letter, dated July 9, 1856, contained a single paragraph. "The Harper matter has become untenable. Proceed with administrative release. Ensure no public record. Destroy all correspondence related to the medical investigation. The state cannot be seen as unable to resolve this." The letter was unsigned. It was cataloged, scanned, and placed in the county archives. No further action was taken. The execution notice for Elias Harper remains on file. The charge was never dismissed. The sentence was never commuted. No death certificate was ever issued. The case was never officially closed.